have guided our work, and we had a lot of work to do in a month which has turned out to be particularly demanding. In particularly, I would like to highlight the meticulous and an impartial way in which you, President, led the work of the Security Council pertaining to the selection process of the new Secretary-General of our organization. I would also like to thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary-General for Yemen, Mr. Ismail Ould Sheikh Ahmed, the Under-Secretary-General Stephen O'Brien, and the Regional Director of the World Food Programme, Mr. Muhammad Al-Hadi, for their briefings. Uruguay is concerned as the conflict in Yemen becomes more entrenched. We receive daily reports of the most heinous violations and abuses of international humanitarian law and human rights. The lack of media attention paid to the serious conflict in Yemen does not absolve from responsibility the perpetrators, nor the international community, nor does it absolve from responsibility, President, this very Council. We are concerned at the ongoing violence and the toppling of the institutions of the country as the terrorist scourge spreads. Uruguay regrets the multiple failures of the peace process, including the failure of the latest peace attempt that established a 72-hour ceasefire. We support the resumption of the negotiation process, which for months now has languished in the doldrums without bearing tangible fruit, and which now is dependent on the impact of a weakened roadmap. Uruguay reiterates its appeal to the parties to resume dialogue and to fully comply with commitments to cease hostilities, to lay the foundations conducive for the establishment of peace. It is also essential that actors in the region show their commitment to upholding this peace process, particularly those countries who have influence on the parties to the conflict, who must actively push for said parties to join the quest for a peaceful solution to the war. Against this backdrop, I would like to draw attention to the work carried out by the Special Envoy of the Secretary-General, Mr. Sheikh Ahmed, and to express the support of my delegation to his ongoing efforts seeking to find solutions to end the conflict. Our thanks also go to all those involved in providing humanitarian assistance in Yemen. We can tip our hats to them for their indefatigable and tireless efforts to try and bring relief to the suffering civilian population. Uruguay categorically condemns the continuous attacks against civilian targets in Yemen. Aerial attacks and attacks using mortars and missiles indiscriminately destroy hospitals, schools, markets, residential buildings, and infrastructure. Cluster bombs, anti-personnel mines, and snipers are wreaking havoc amongst the civilian population. We also condemn the attacks launched from Yemen, striking at holy sites in Saudi Arabia, as well as those attacks launched from Yemen targeting shipping in the Bab el-Mandeb Straits. All the actors in the conflict in Yemen are demonstrating complete contempt for the norms and standards that govern or should govern armed conflict, thus causing enormous suffering and catastrophic impact on the civilian population, which has found itself trapped in the combat areas. In Yemen, as in Syria, we are spiraling out of control towards levels of inhumanity that have never before been seen. And here, President, having made that point, I would like to make an explicit reference to the terrorist attack, and let me repeat that wording, terrorist attack, carried out on the 8th of October in Sana'a against a community centre where a funeral was underway. An attack in which more than 150 persons lost their lives and more than 500 were wounded. I use the term terrorist attack, President, because here, in this country, the United States, where I was educated and where I lived for many years, I was taught repeatedly that if an animal looks like a duck, and if it walks like a duck, and indeed if it talks like a duck with its distinctive quack, then we must take it that it is, in fact, a duck. The operation, or the terrorist attack, which I have just referred to, was carried out using tactics that are usually used by terrorists. It was a surprise attack. It was timed to take place at a moment when the number of attendees was the greatest. We had a first explosive attack, then there was a deliberate pause of several minutes to give time for the first emergency responders to arrive, and then there was a second explosion. This is a typical terrorist operation or pattern of attack. But in this particular case, Chair, President, they went one step further, and the pattern was repeated twice in order to ensure the greatest possible destruction. President, amongst the array of cultures, societies and religions represented in this organization, we all have similar customs with regard to the currents of life and of death. We celebrate births and we mourn the dead. I ask myself, President, which of our societies, which of our cultures, which of our religions, which of our gods would justify an attack on a funeral? Who feels so omnipotent, so all-powerful and untouchable as to be able to order such a vile action? Who feels so untouchable, so far beyond the reach of the law that it would be capable of carrying out an atrocity such as this? However, it must also be said, President, that this attack was not carried out using artisanal or homemade weapons. We're not dealing here with an improvised explosive device or IED. In this attack, they didn't use barrel or conventional bombs, nor did they use cars or lorries laden with explosives. The group of experts on Yemen have informed us that they found in the ruins of the community centre remains clearly identified as being those of a sophisticated guidance system for a duly identified specific type of aerially launched bomb. Furthermore, the type of bomb used has the unique feature of being encased in a hard steel shell that allows the bomb to penetrate a concrete structure and to hit the ground and only to explode shortly after hitting the ground. I think it is something similar on a smaller scale to the so-called bunker-busting bombs, which are being used so indiscriminately and widely in Aleppo. If our information is correct, this type of guidance system is manufactured by just 2 companies in the world, and the bomb that the system guides is manufactured by a single company in the world. Moreover, apparently, neither the guidance system nor bombs of this nature can be acquired on the black market in arms. Rather, they are only sold from government to government and at very high prices. In Spanish, we have a saying that literally translates to "weapons are loaded by the devil." But, President, weapons are fired by man, and responsibility is borne by the one who presses the launch button or pulls the trigger, and it's also borne by the individual who facilitates access to the weapon in the first place. It goes without saying, President, that the initial attempts at explanation as to what happened have already begun, with claims that it was an involuntary error or mistake due to inaccurate intelligence information. Added to those excuses is information that exhaustive investigations are underway to clarify and ascertain the facts. I would add, President, that in this case we are dealing with 2 involuntary errors, given that 2 attacks were carried out. And furthermore, may I say what extraordinary accuracy and precision must be required to repeat exactly the same error in exactly the same community centre. No doubt it would also be claimed, President, that it was the same errors that led to Médecins Sans Frontières being compelled to evacuate 6 hospitals in Yemen because of the repeated aerial attacks that it was subject to, despite the fact that the geographical coordinates of the precise location of the aforementioned 6 hospitals had been communicated to and disseminated amongst all parties to the conflict. There's somebody out there, President, who seems to be repeating errors on an almost unbelievable frequency. At the time, it was also said that exhaustive investigations would be carried out to ascertain the facts, but we do not have any information neither as to who carried out the attacks or as to who supplied the bombs used. And in light of what happened, I would also like to draw attention and express my regret about the fact that the Security Council has done nothing, Chair, President, not even released a press statement about what happened on the 8th of October in that community centre. I regret the fact, President, that the Security Council has not been able to do anything, has not seen fit to do anything. President, the excuses and regrets, whether it be because a mistake was made or because it is claimed that they are attacking and targeting terrorists, will not raise from the dead the hundreds of children, women and elderly lying crushed beneath the ruins in Sana or Aleppo. Uruguay condemns all attacks against civilians, whether they take place in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, or in any other place, and irrespective of whom the victims are. We cannot, as the Security Council, condemn aerial attacks that kill civilians in Syria and remain mute in the face of similar events in Yemen. There is no room for a double standard in this area, as we are constantly reminded by a colleague, Rafael from Venezuela. Those responsible for these vile atrocities and their accomplices must be held accountable for their crimes. President, it is time for a ceasefire and to seek a return to the negotiating table. We all know very well that conflicts have no military solution. The only way of solving a conflict such as this is through directly negotiated political agreements between the parties. I hope I will be forgiven for repeating myself, President, but I wish to say once again, born out of my complete conviction that it is true, that Colombia is providing the world an exemplary model of what an unrelenting quest for peace actually looks like. But of course, President, in order to pursue peace along these lines, you need courage, not the superficial valor of beating one's chest and brandishing a gun, but rather the deep-rooted courage of extending one's hand to one's enemy, clasping an olive branch as a sign of peace. Thank you very much, President.
I thank the representative of Uruguay for his statement, and now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to Ismail, Stephen, and Mohammed for your very powerful briefings. You are all doing vital work on this issue, and as Security Council penholder on Yemen, I want to reiterate in open session today our appreciation for your tireless efforts. As you have all highlighted, the sheer scale of the crisis facing the people of Yemen means that there can be no let-up in our efforts. It is a political crisis, a humanitarian crisis, a crisis where the violence simply won't end. As a result, civilians continue to suffer, with over 14 million people now food insecure and over 21 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. That is the tragic cost of the ongoing conflict in Yemen. In response, we all know what needs to happen. First, the violence must stop. There needs to be an enduring, meaningful cessation of hostilities. I was proud of the UK's efforts to help secure a ceasefire early this month, but it is clear that 3 days is simply not enough. So we call on the parties to renew their commitment and implement an immediate, sustainable ceasefire. In support of that goal, we also need to make sure that the De-escalation and Coordination Committee has the support, training and resources that it needs. The committee is a crucial mechanism for building trust and addressing violations. If the Yemeni parties are serious about peace, they should engage with it fully. Sadly, any signs of de-escalation have been elusive of late. Only last week, a long-range missile was fired from Sada into Saudi Arabia, reportedly at the King Abdulaziz International Airport north of Jeddah. This attack by the Houthi and Saleh loyalists was provocative and unacceptable. All sides need to show restraint. We were shocked and appalled by the terrible loss of life in the airstrikes on the funeral hall in Sana'a earlier this month. We immediately underlined our deep concerns at ministerial level with the Saudi government. Over 140 people died that day. Elvio has just spoken very powerfully about it, and I share his disappointment and his regret that this Security Council was unable to agree the draft press statement that the UK had circulated, which would have strongly condemned that attack. Despite this failure, the UK is clear that there must be accountability for that attack. The release of an initial investigation by the Coalition's Joint Incidents Assessment Team is a positive step towards this. Stopping the violence, Mr. President, is just the first step. And even that won't be enough to help the millions of people in need of assistance in Yemen. Regardless of progress on the ceasefire, we also need to make concerted strides on improving the humanitarian situation. At the General Assembly last month, the UK hosted an event which raised $100 million for Yemen. Half of that money came from the UK itself. And the international community and UN agencies also committed to strengthening their response. But money alone is never enough. counts for very little, in fact, when aid can't get through. So let us call on the parties to take every step possible to improve humanitarian access so that we can help alleviate the suffering of the millions in need. Ultimately, for all of this to be sustainable, the cessation of hostilities, the humanitarian access, we need the stability that comes only from a political process. And that requires compromise between the parties. So we welcome your presentation, Ismail, of the roadmap to the Yemeni parties. It sets out how that compromise can be achieved. It says clearly the security and political steps that the parties must take to reach a peaceful resolution. While the path ahead on the political track has become clearer, it is still a path that has yet to be followed fully. We are disappointed by the continuing failure of the Houthis and Saleh to engage on the Sana'a security plan in defiance of Resolution 2216, and by President Hadi's public rejection of the roadmap. We hope he will now receive it and engage on it in good faith. In fact, we call on all parties to engage in good faith with the Special Envoy and to return to negotiations on the basis of the roadmap and in a spirit of compromise. As they do so, the Special Envoy will have the UK's full support for his efforts to bring the parties together. We take note of his requests just now for full Security Council support, and as penholder on this issue, we will continue to work on a draft Security Council resolution calling on all parties to do 4 things. 1, return to an immediate cessation of hostilities. 2, return to negotiations on the basis of the roadmap. 3, bring about accountability for alleged breaches of international humanitarian law. And 4, allow unhindered access for humanitarian aid. We pledge to continue working with our partners on this resolution in support of the UN Special Envoy and all his efforts on the roadmap and on the cessation of hostilities and ultimately on bringing peace to Yemen. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and now I'd like to give the floor to the representative of Japan, please.
Mr. President, I would like to express my gratitude to Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Mr. Ismail Oud Sheikh Ahmed, Under Secretary General Mr. Stephen O'Brien, and Mr. Mohamed Hadi of the World Food Programme for their comprehensive briefing today.